Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, How Election Integrity is Ensured, an inside look at secure and verifiable online voting. In our last session, we explored why proven election integrity matters. And today we're going to take the next step, looking at how it actually is achieved in an online voting system. We'll have a deep look at the underlying principles and how the different components assure that we have an end-to-end verifiable election system. I'm Jakob, your host today. It's my debut, and I'm a stand-in for Sylvie, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today. But I'm being assisted by some great and knowledgeable speakers today. Jonas Parello-Plesner, Executive Director at the Alliance of Democracies Foundation, and Victor, is our own Global Solution Manager at Lumi Global, and who is very knowledgeable in online voting, and in particular, the end-to-end verifiable components. So thank you very much for attending. Before we start this important discussion, I would like to go through a few housekeeping items. Firstly, I will mention that this session is recorded, and the link will be shared with you afterwards. Please, this is an invitation for you to ask questions if you have any, and you can do it throughout the messaging chat in the platform if you have any questions, comments that you want us to address. Finally, I'm to tell you all that we are conducting a survey that we kindly request you to answer afterwards. We want to know if this format suits you or if there's anything we can do to improve our game in webinar. So thank you very much. To begin with, Jonas, I would like to turn to you. Could you give us a brief presentation? I mean, we've known each other for some time. We are both we are met in different forums to fight for democracy in different parts of the world, and also, of course, in Denmark. Can you please give an introduction to what you do in the Alliance of Democracies?
Jacob, and thanks to you and Lumi for having me join this webinar. I'm excited about that. We saw each other just recently at which is actually explains a bit about our activity at the Copenhagen Democracy Summit, which is a big annual event we keep where we gather together democratic forces from all over the world. One of our themes there is the link between democracy and technology, and how in our view, we want to, of course, make technology work for democracy so that it improves our democracy, it makes people more willing to participate, makes people more possible to join elections, and so on. But we, of course, also see the inverse, that it can be technology can pose a threat or a danger to democracy. As Brad Smith, president of Microsoft, has called it in a book, technology is both tools and weapons. So basically, you could see it in both ways. So I would say some of our work started prompted by the US presidential election in 2016, where we for the first time saw a state actor, Russia, trying to kind of interfere through many of the digital means that are now possible in a democratic election. I mean, all our politicians do their campaigns not just by going around knocking doors any longer. They also still do that, luckily. But most of them also, of course, maintain social media profiles on Facebook, Instagram, X, and so on, and use that as a way of communicating with their voters. The Russians saw that and used that as well for both creating fake profiles, creating different kind of fake animosity around different topics, and using the ad system at that time that was really not very restricted to put ads in for basically political opinions that were shaped in Russia, not in the US. So following that, we created a Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity. Actually, Joe Biden, the later president, was one of our founding members of that. It was also based on a bipartisan basis, so we had a leading Republican, Michael Chertoff, that was also leading that. And we've done different initiatives. For example, we've done election pledges up to elections around the world, where we ask candidates to sign up to sort of how to be a nice digital gentleman or woman in cyberspace, not use bots, be clear about the way you use everything from AI to other technical tools in your campaign. That was one way. We also worked on something called the disinformation diaries that we published up towards different elections, which was a game that could be played, or people through that game learned about different disinformation techniques from deep fakes through a politician that sort of kind of went through her campaign and things that happened to her during that campaign. So we tried in different ways to kind of sensibilize people about these issues. But again, as I said at the outset, we're also very in that sense tech pro, that we also see this as possibilities for solutions as well, which is part of what you guys are doing is really, and I, as many others to join here the webinar, look forward to hearing about the technical part, because I think I've already now introduced the two T's. I mean, I think it's very much trust and then technology. Technology that works is what makes people use it and say, okay, this can actually benefit the way. And then trust, of course, that you have the public's trust, particularly when it's around elections, which is one of sort of the most vital trust building for representative democracies. So that's a little bit sort of, I would say, some of the frame. There's more I could talk about. And I realize I haven't mentioned our democracy and tech entrepreneurs, but that might be for a later date. So if there's anything you would like to follow up and think would be interesting for people to hear about our activities, I'm all available.
Yes, I think there's many things to what you do that's very interesting, and this two-edged sword that we are dealing with, and we also dealt with in the last webinar, focusing on the threats. You are having monitors, understanding what's going on in many different countries, in particular the frontline countries. What do you see as the biggest threats to democracy? There's no secret that it's in general in decline. That report after report shows that. But how do you see these threats, and what do you how can you see that the landscape of these threats has changed and maybe will change even more in the years to come?
Good question. And of course, one we all sort of grapple with. I mean, I think one would be technology, the fact that technology changes. If we look at artificial intelligence, the way that's rolling through our world at the moment, that of course also what we just talked about with this information creates completely both new opportunities, but also a lot of new pitfalls as well that you could see in my field. You could see the explosion, for example, of artificially created content that purport to be politicians. During the 2024 presidential elections, you at a time had these robocalls that were supposed to be from presidential candidate, and at that time sitting president as well, Biden, but were actually his voice that was made through artificial intelligence. So of course there is a huge issue right now of what can you trust? What is it enough just to see things to trust them, or do you need some other verification? Which is actually something that some of the companies we've been working with as well have been working on, is there sort of verification system with photos and videos that you could use in order to make sure that the public feels certain about the verifiability kind of it. So I think that's one big of a bucket of issues, and there are a number of others, of course, that makes that sort of democracy unfortunately is in decline in many established democracies, and we don't see as many countries any longer that move from having been either autocracies or semi-autocratic into the democratic camp. But that's of course why I keep doing my job, is that had I done this back in the late 90s, where everything looked like it was just rolling in the right direction, then you might not need an alliance of democracies foundation. And I think now you really need it for all the democratic forces around the world that says freedom and democracy is still kind of the most fundamental building stone, both for our societies, but also for ourselves as individuals.
Those end of history heydays was just amazing, weren't they? But yeah, maybe they came with a cost. If you are to, in this sort of volatile climate that we have now, if you're going to focus on something where you really believe, and maybe we're talking about election stuff, where do you believe that the biggest challenge is to overcome when it comes to public trust in elections, and using the technology as a mean to conduct elections? Do you have any experience or any ideas of that?
Well, I think trust is the fundamental element. Having watched the US elections, I lived in the US during the 2016 election. I was an election observer actually during that. And there you both have ballots and you also have some element of electronic voting, particularly for out of state or for military personnel or the like. And which I actually think you have some experience in sort of the running some of those electronic elections. So I think the other problem is that it doesn't even necessarily matter whether it's technology or not. It's like there's a general distrust, and you of course you've seen both in the 2020 election, which Donald Trump at that time contested, and onwards, that there's been questioning, on social media, photos of people stuffing ballot boxes, which again means that's distrust in even the paper method. Then of course you've had in some cases the distrust in technology, saying, can this be hacked? Can the Russians, as we talked about earlier, can they then influence our elections if we do it? I mean, even a very highly digitalized society like our own, the Danish one, has actually for a while now stopped some of the experiments with digital voting and stayed on paper, even though a lot of everything else we do on digital, based on the fear of saying, is there a system? Which it sounds like there is out there. So that's why I'm also excited about hearing more about sort of the practical aspects of your system. But that shows you really need the people's trust basically to move there. And if that's broken in general, then I think it's complicated no matter how good your technology, like in a market like the US one. And in other cases, I think it's also just about gradually changing people's habits and saying that this actually kind of works, and maybe starting smaller in some of the areas where like out of state votes or something like that, where it makes a lot of sense of using electronic means, and then gradually moving sort of to the more a general digital election.
Thank you, Jonas. That was very insightful, and there's two takeaways here. Miscrediting the election has become a frequently used political strategy, and that also goes for elections that are not necessary at parliamentary level. We know that. But also that a big part of this is actually education of the general public in how these things, and it's different when these principles we know from the physical polling stations is to be applied on an online election platform. But that's why I want to turn my focus towards you, Victor. And now we sort of leave this macro perspective, meta perspective, to go into to the machinery and the mechanics of how we actually maintain this trust, proven trust in elections. And for those who did not attend the last meeting, the last webinar, or maybe want to have a recap, Victor, could you please give us an introduction?
Yes, thank you, Jacob. My name is Victor Hidalgo. I am the Global Solutions Manager here at Lumi, and I've been working in the election business with online voting systems for 12 years now. So basically helping introduce online voting to organizations across the globe, both governments, public organizations, and also private associations, etc. So yeah, happy to be here with you today.
Thank you, Victor. And I'll just move straight to it. The first sort of obvious question, I'm on the look for an election system. What should I be thinking of? What kind of checklist should I have?
Well, when it comes to elections, it basically comes to transparency and openness. So I would start saying that any online voting system that has to do with elections should be transparent in terms of documentation, should be well documented. It should provide public proofs. Of course, you should give access to auditors to all the documentation, the code, to all these public proofs, so you can demonstrate this transparency. And also it needs to have distributed trust. What we call distributed trust, it's because you don't need to trust the vendor, you don't need to trust the provider, but instead of this, there can be several stakeholders, usually observers, scrutineers, members of the electoral board, who can, among all of them, have this distributed trust to perform any critical action in the system. And then, of course, you also have the international recognition, independent recognition of the system you want to use. So nowadays, and since we had the pandemic in 2020 with COVID, all of a sudden, all of new voting systems start to came up, but you need to, stick up to standards, to well done state-of-the-art and academic research in the field, which has been for more than 20 years a field of study in cryptography, and you need to be compliant with the standards out there. There is not an official international standard on online voting yet. However, there are some local standards, like for example in France, Germany, etc. And I would say that perhaps the de facto standard, the most well known, are the Council of Europe recommendations for state members on how to introduce online voting, even if there's no such a thing as an ISO of online voting yet. But these standards, what they say is that the online voting systems, any technology applied to electoral processes, it must guarantee the same levels of integrity, privacy, etc., that any system with paper voting. So the same universal principles, voter secrecy, anonymity, integrity of the election, eligibility of the voter, transparency, should apply also to the voting system. And last but not least, of course, and we are here to talk about this, it's verifiability. It's what we call end-to-end verifiability, which basically means that you can have what we call individual verifiability and universal verifiability. Individual means that any voter in the system should be able to check that their vote was really counted and really received by the system and counted correctly. And universal means that any auditor, any third party can come in, you can give them these proofs that we talk about for auditors and scrutineers, and they can check that the proofs hold, mathematically check it, and that the election has been run smoothly, nobody has rigged the election, nobody has tried to tamper with the results.
So that was like a checklist of all the different components in the application that you think is needed. I can say that I do agree, as we are working on this system for a long time. But the principle I need is not, I know it's not known to many, so that's why it's important to know these things. They do make sense. Other components you could mention that is not related to the component of the app, but more of the service in general, resilience, these kind of things. What's your take on that?
Yes, that's a very complex and broad question, but of course, first of all, I always like to say, like we did in the last webinar, that there's no such a thing as a tamper-proof system. If somebody tells you that, that's an outright lie, because no matter what, of course, there are always some residual risks. Of course, you can design your system to be as tamper-resistant as possible, and we do that. But the most important thing is not that it's tamper-proof, it's that it is what we call tamper-evident. So if you have any attack, any attempt of not only from external threats, but also from internal malicious administrators or stakeholders who try to manipulate the election, that you are aware of it and that you can take corrective actions. So only if you are sure, 100% sure that nobody happened, then you can be sure that the results of the election are fair and are not disputable. So this is a process of continuous learning, evaluation, retesting, because of course the state of the art keeps evolving and you need to keep up the pace. But the most important thing is that you are able to detect such kind of things. And in this case, even if the threat analysis models that we have are under this continuous improvement, I would say that being a little paranoid, if you allow me, is not bad in this case when you're with elections, working with elections.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine why that helps. These are sort of this is the list that you provided, but there's one thing I would like to focus on just a little bit. You talk about distributed trust. I mean, we are used when we talk to clients, when we talk to people, saying this have to be super easy. But what do you say about distributed trust involving a whole range of people? Can you break down a little bit what that actually means and how this is organized to achieve this end-to-end verifiability?
Yes, yes, of course. Distributed trust basically means that there shouldn't be a single person or a single entity that has the powers to perform any critical action in the system. Okay, we can define critical actions like, for example, generating and distributing voting credentials for all the voters in the electoral roll. If I, as an administrator, or the entity who is running the election has access to all credentials, of course, they could vote on behalf of their voters. So it's usually recommended that you have separate credential authorities that, for example, if we use the typical user and password combination, one of the credential authorities knows all the users, another one knows all the passwords, but they don't collude to collaborate. And the other typical critical action would be decrypting the ballots and getting to polish the results of the elections. In this case, what it's usually done is that you can have several keys. These are cryptographic keys, but this is like the same example I always put is like in American movies where you need to launch a missile and there are several people that need to put several keys in there. This is the same cryptographic equivalent where several members of the electoral board, several trustees, which can be people that have different opinions, different interests. So it's highly improbable that they will collude to collaborate to rig the election. They each hold a separate key and they need to gather together to reconstruct the key and then get the results. Again, this means that not even an administrator from Lumi or from the provider, whoever that has all the passwords, super administrator, could do anything because we don't want you to trust the provider. You don't need to trust the provider, but the trust should be distributed among several stakeholders.
So the conclusion is that online elections, as the physical polling station, requires people and trust in different people to conduct the election. So
Exactly.
checks and balances. Okay, thank you so much for this. One thing, I mean, this was a good checklist of what we need to have a focus on, and I think we had sort of brief ideas of how this works, but I think we need to take a step further into how this actually
Sure.
is conducted, the roles, the activities, everything you do, you need to do in this, because I think what we want to learn here is what's the difference between we might see two which appear to be identical ballots, digital ballots, but what is the difference between the one that is you can say a black box system and the one that is able to provide the proof? So let's go a step further into this. It's apparent that this end-to-end verifiability has become a benchmark, for a premium benchmark for what is actually to be trusted. You sort of touched upon those different verifiabilities, universal and individual verifiabilities. Could you take that as a step further in terms of how this is achieved and what it actually does? Because it's slightly different from the processes we know from the physical polling station.
Yes. Yes. So I think that we should start with the basic definition. So end-to-end verifiability, what does it mean? This is basically, technically speaking, if a system is end-to-end verifiable, it means that it's, as we said, tamper resistant, but mainly it's tamper evident. It means it allows to check that all the results, all the processes can be scrutinized and can be verified. So simply put, it means that you can check from one end, so this is the voting process, where the voting process starts, to the other end, which is basically the release of the results. And this is not a marketing term that we have just come up with. It's a formal definition from the academia. And we have a slide that we can show now, which depicts the different types of verifiability. And only if your system has these three types of verifiability that we can see in this slide, then we can say that the system is end-to-end verifiable. And these are the following. The first one is called cast as intended verifiability. The second one is recorded as cast, and the last one is counted as recorded. What do they mean? And most importantly, why do we need this kind of verifiability mechanisms? Let's start with the first one. The first one, cast as intended. This means that the voter, they should be able to check the contents of their ballot. Okay, as you can see here in the slide, when you cast a ballot in an online voting system, usually it's encrypted, so nobody can read its contents. So how do I know? Because I myself, the voter, can read the contents of the ballot when it's sent. How do I know that I don't have a malware on my computer, that I have something malfunctioning, that even if I click on candidate A, the malware doesn't change it, changes to candidate B and then encrypts and sends? This is why it's important to have this kind of verifiability. The second one, it's called recorded as cast, and this means that once that ballot is sent to the voting server, how do I know as a voter that my ballot really reached the ballot box and really was included in the final tally? So, as you said the words black box. For us, all IT systems are like a black box that, okay, I click on cast, and then I don't know what happens because you cannot see through the technology. So there should be an easy way for layman that doesn't need to be computer savvy to check that the vote really reached the ballot box and really was included in the final tally. And finally, counted as recorded verifiability, which basically means that in this case, it's not for voters, it's for auditors. So you can see here that we have these two groups of individual and universal verifiability. Auditors can check that all the results that you have at the very end of the election, saying candidate A, 2,000 votes, candidate B, 1,000 votes, how do we know, how can we prove that these votes really come from the content of the encrypted ballots and not that someone just made them up in any way? So any auditor, any third party can come in, you can give them the mathematical proofs produced by the system to really check that those results really hold and really come from the encrypted ballots. So the typical example I always put is the candidate who lost the election, the candidate who was second in the race, they can bring in their own auditors, you can give them the proofs, and usually the auditor says yes, and the candidate who lost the election accepts the result. This is the best way that everybody else, all the voters in the electoral roll, would say, yes, okay, this was conducted fairly, nobody has rigged the election.
Sounds complicated, but I think in a minute that we will take the journey of the voter, of the scrutineers, of the trustee, of the administrators. I just wanted to say, if just want to ask you if you could maybe explain a little bit more about the building blocks that we have built to create this system. Which kind of components are at stake here?
Yes, these are the three basic components that I mentioned. Okay, so cast as intended, recorded as cast, and counted as recorded. And what we can explain is how they actually work. And so
Yes.
this was the why they are important. So only you have the three of them, you can check end to end that this is working. But how does this exactly work? This means that for voters, for example, the first two, which are the individual verifiability, the voter can check when they're about to cast their ballot. They can do what we call a challenge of the ballot. So the ballot is ready to be sent, it's encrypted, so nobody can read its contents. Then there is a mechanism by which the voter can say, okay, I'm not going to cast this ballot, I'm going to challenge it to check if my device is functioning properly, I don't have any malware, etc. Then you can force the system to decrypt the ballot locally, usually using a separate device, a mobile phone. You can scan a QR code or whatever, and then you see the results of your ballot. And then you know that your device is functioning properly and you don't have any malware, okay? Of course, once this ballot is decrypted, it's spoiled because you cannot use it anymore. A ballot that is decrypted cannot take part in the election. Then the voter needs to recast it again, now with the confidence that their voting device is functioning properly. This is for the cast as intended, and then for the second one, the recorded as cast, the voter, that's even easier. Once he finishes or she finishes the casting process, the ballot is sent, and then the voter usually gets what we call a voting receipt, which is a tracking code. This is an anonymous code with just numbers, letters, some random numbers of letters that doesn't contain any information about the voter, who is the voter, or the options they voted for. And as such, as this is anonymous, this can be published in a public bulletin board. And I, as a voter, can go to that bulletin board, to that list of receipts, look for my receipt number. And if my receipt number is there, it means that my ballot really reached the ballot box and really was included in the final tally.
So that's the ballot
And
box you can watch at the polling station, see that all the
exactly.
ballots are there, but you can actually check that your ballot is there and that it will be a part of the tallying in the end.
Exactly. This is the same as the ballot box being transparent in most polling places, even if there are countries where it's a wooden ballot box.
Yeah.
Usually in modern democracies, it's transparent because of this. You need to see that your ballot is in there and that that this is not a shredding machine that when you put the ballot is destroyed or anything.
I
Yes,
think
that's
it's fair
exactly
to
it.
say that this is really mirroring the principles from the physical polling station, making sure that everything is auditable. So no,
Exactly.
all fair questions in terms of integrity can be met with an adequate answer.
Exactly. With this shift of paradigm that comes from the physical world, where you can see all the physical elements, you can see your polling station, you can see the ballot box, you can touch the paper. You need to shift to the virtual IT world. You need to put some measures in place that mimic exactly the same process. So you can verify the contents of the ballot, you can verify that your ballot is there, you can verify the same things that you would do in the physical world.
And the last part, that's for external scrutineers.
Yes, the
What is
last
it?
part, as we said, this is what we call universal verifiability, because anyone can check that part. And basically, it all goes. I won't go to the technical details. I think that we have planned another webinar for more technical people who are interested in the crypto behind this.
Yes.
But basically, it all boils down that the system generates a series of mathematical proofs. These are called zero knowledge proofs in cryptography that basically demonstrate that the results that are coming after the decryption has been done, after all the mixing to make sure that the ballots are anonymous, these really come from the contents of the encrypted ballots without revealing the content of an individual ballot. That's why they are called zero knowledge proofs. So this is something that not anyone can do, but any mathematics professor from any university in the world, without a background in online voting, you can give them these mathematical proofs and they can check that hold. And if they hold, you demonstrate 100% mathematically that nobody has come up with the results or nobody has rigged the election. And that's what gives the final confidence that if my vote really contained my voting options, if my vote was well received by the ballot box, and finally all the votes were accurately counted, this is why you have
Yeah.
end-to-end verifiability.
And I think it makes sense to make a short advertisement for the upcoming event. It's not planned yet when it will be, but we will have a webinar dedicated to demonstrating and illustrating those layer of cryptography that is included to achieve all those you can say paradoxical requirements that we have. We need to know who you are, but we cannot know what you are doing. Still, we need to know what you are doing is actually what we at the end, what is it at the end is a part of the telling. So, so more to come. Stay tuned. This was a quite in-depth demonstration and walk through the different components, but I think it will be sensible for also for the audience here to get a more sort of an overview. How is this actually practically done? How do we exercise such an election? I mean, from what we have heard now, it could sound quite complex and difficult to do for anyone in this game. Could you walk us through what's actually in
Yes.
practice happening when you're conducting an election, and maybe take the start from configuration and people setting up the system, and just
Yes.
what kind of roles are engaged here.
Yes, it may seem complex, but it's not after you've done so many elections. Of course, the complexity was in the design of the system, but then when you need to run an election, as you said, it all starts with the configuration phase. So basically, you need to configure the election with all the contests, candidates, etc. This is configured by the administrator, and then we usually run what we call the trustee ceremony. We talked about this concept of distributed trust. So there are some trustees who hold the keys to later on decrypt all the results. So the key needed to decrypt the results is like a split, it's a partial decryption key that then you need to put together a threshold, a minimum threshold of members of this electoral board, of these trustees, to make sure that you can decrypt and recover the results. Once that is ready, then you need, of course, to distribute the credentials among all voters. This can be done through several ways: email, SMS, different channels. You can integrate with third-party identity providers. The important here again is that you have distributed trust, you have different credential authorities, so you don't have any single entity, any single individual with the power to vote on behalf of voters. And yeah, then you basically run the election. You open the election for as many days or as few as you want, so people can log in using a standard browser. You don't need to install any application. This is very easy to use. You don't need any training. You cast your vote, you click your candidates, you check if you want. This is optional. For those voters that are more concerned with verifiability, they can check that their ballot really contains the voting options, as we said. They can keep their voting receipt to check during the election, after the election. This is up to every voter. And finally, once the voting period ends, of course, there is a closing ceremony where you get to gather together again these trustees that we created the keys for them in the initial phases to basically get the results, which is what everyone wants after an election, and have the results. But it doesn't stop here. Somebody would say, okay, this is the final step, getting the results. There is a post-election assessment and audits that I would say is as important as everyone, of course, wants to know the results of the election. But after the election, you should run this audit and check these proofs that we have mentioned, universal verifiability proofs, to make sure that not only you have the results, but you can be 100% sure that these results come from a faithful source and that nobody has tried to tamper with them.
Trust and verify.
Exactly.
So, and I think also it's fair to say that it requires a little bit more of the voters, not a lot, and it is definitely achievable. But in order for us to vote from home from an unsecure environment, a few steps will make it and do the whole difference to achieve this end-to-end verifiability. Thank you very much. I think that was a profound, and we were happy to. You can find more about how this works on the website. There are some explainers there, but I think it was a good introduction to the concept of end-to-end verifiability and how we achieve it through different types of roles and activities. However, there's one thing that comes with this. This is, of course, also a two-edged sword. There is also sometimes you can say if the security and verifiability goes up, then the accessibility goes down. That's sort of a general point. How do you see this? Can we achieve security and verifiability without sacrificing accessibility? Because if people can't access the system, then we have not done what we should.
Yes, that's a fair concern, because it's true that this is a traditional trade-off in IT systems that everyone knows is like in a scale. If you increase security, the more you increase security, the least usable is the system. However, the whole point of online voting, or one of the points of online voting, is precisely making voting more accessible for everyone. So it's not only more convenient, but you need to make sure that voting is universal and is accessible to all types of voters. This means overseas voters who are living away from their country and they cannot vote on their own. People who are living away from a polling place. For example, in Australia, they use online voting, and they allow online voting for those people who live more than 20 kilometers away from a polling place, because it's a huge country and they are spread all over the country. People with disabilities, of course, people who have vision disabilities and cannot vote on their own, they need assistance, or motor disabilities and they cannot go to the polling place. This is the reason why, one of the reasons why online voting exists. And this is why the accessibility is built in from the very beginning in the design of these systems. So these systems are designed to support accessible technologies like screen readers, etc. So to be compliant with the web accessibility guidelines, the WCAG 2.1 accessibility guidelines. So you can allow them not losing all the security and all the cryptography and verifiability that we have, to vote on their own. In fact, there are several testimonies of people that said, this is the first time I could vote on my own, because before I needed the assistance of a friend or a relative or whatever to go with me to the polling place and help me with the ballot or whatever. With these assistive technologies that already exist, fortunately, this opens the door to a more universal vote for every kind of voter.
Thank you, Victor. I think it's about to have the Q&A session. Just a quick reminder, I'm to say that this is being recorded. You can still forward questions to us through the message system. And still, I would encourage people to take the survey at the end of this session. Thank you, Victor. I think we covered a lot of ground here, and I know it's super complex, and it will probably take time to digest everything we learned here. But I think the important message here is that we are on an educational journey where we need to understand this component in order to achieve what is important, and that is a proven election result that can serve, that can honor the trust that everyone deserves in an election. Winners, losers, stakeholders, voters, everyone engaged for a sustainable needs a sustainable democracy, and that requires a trust and a proven trust in the election process. Jonas, just before we close, a final question for you. Based on what we have learned today and your experience, is there any takeaways from this that you would like to highlight?
Well, thanks, Jacob. This has been really interesting to listen to. So I hope I've been on a journey learning about it. I think what I want to repeat is basically the two T's, trust and technology. I mean, that you both need the trust, particularly when you talk about democratic elections. Then, of course, you need the technology that works. That's what Victor's just explained. But I think you need that education. You kind of need to gradually build that sort of trust around the technology by having people learn about it. I mean, I myself personally, even though I'm a little bit in this field, I learned a lot about sort of just like the sort of the more technical part about how this works. And that, of course, is a pretty big task of coming out, doing that for many more people. Also doing it to if it's, for example, be the US, to very skeptical audiences that already have a sort of made bias that digital tools will actually just enhance fraud. So I think there's a massive work in, as you talked about, education as well, for building that trust and of saying, hey, here is how it is, here is how we do it in practice. And that's, again, maybe also why it's good to start with maybe parts of election, parts of the electorate where electronic voting makes even more sense for special groups, from the military to elderly and others, that where the fact of going to the ballot box is either impossible or hard to attain.
Thanks, Jonas. I completely agree. We have a few questions coming in here, and one, I think you mentioned that in the beginning, but it's with regards to standards. If there's any standards we can turn to in choosing an online election system, or what can you recommend for people to assess?
Yeah. So, yeah, well, like I said, there's no international official standard for online voting. However, of course, there are like the cybersecurity standards like ISO 27001, etc. But these are not enough, I would say. You need the elections business, and the online voting world is very specific. So in this case, there are like de facto standards like the Council of Europe recommendations. There are local standards. In France, you have the recommendations from the CNIL, the Data Protection Agency, the ANSI, the Security Agency. You have the BSI in Germany, and they're quite standards. And I would say that it would be a good idea, and we from Lumi are very in favor of pushing for defining a new international standard, an ISO of online voting, whatever you want to call it, to make sure that people who are not, and you don't need to attend these kind of webinars anymore, but just know that with this seal of approval, you have a system that is both secure and verifiable. So yeah, that would be a great idea.
Yes, because it can be difficult to orientate and understand the full scope of the market. So I agree that this push for a European standard to demonstrate what is actually needed to create a trustworthy democratic result. I know there's a business going on in terms of providing these, but yeah, I don't have high hopes for the short run. So I think the answer will be that there's a lot to cover, and it's actually not super friendly for those who's out there trying to find an appropriate system. You have to
Yes.
be very knowledgeable and do a lot of research.
Yes, and attend this kind of webinars in your free time.
Also a good idea. There's another question here, and that's related to the complexity. I mean, we have tried to break it up and to explain how it works. But this introduction of the end-to-end verifiability with all its complexity and components and different services connecting, requiring more from the administrators, from the trustees, from the voters. Don't you see that as a potential threat to participation? I mean, people sort of choosing not to take part, or how do you see that?
Not really. In fact, what we've seen is the contrary, that the turnout usually increases in all type of associations, universities, organizations, any election you run, when you introduce online voting as an extra channel.
Yeah.
Because you don't need to replace paper voting completely. You can just keep paper voting and also introduce online voting for having an advanced voting period, whatever. Usually the turnout increases. And I wouldn't say this is more complicated. Maybe there is a little bit of a change of a mindset, but that with the new generations, even that is not needed now, because it's very easy to use. I mean, you not need to be computer savvy. It's just logging into a website, scroll, click the candidate you want to choose, cast, and then you get a receipt number that if you want, you can write it down, you can save for later. If you don't want because you're happy, then it's up to you. So it's very user friendly for the final voter, for the final user, and for the administrators, trustees, etc. It's also, once you understand this concept of distributed trust, once you understand the importance of verifying everything, it's not more complex. It's just that you need to change your mindset, I would say. And I would even say that, and perhaps I'm guessing the mind of the person who has asked this question, it's also not more expensive. It's it's something that you can afford, that you don't need to go with a black box system because you think that this is okay, but this is just for government elections or for etc. No, we at Lumi we think that all elections matter and all elections deserve to be verifiable.
Then there's this additional question. What about live voting, where you need the result like this?
Yeah.
It's difficult for those trustees to gather and sit there together and decrypt the result. So is that a cost we just have to have when we are conducting AGMs, live voting events, and the sort?
Yeah, that's also a good point, because usually the live events where you need like results like this and to be more agile, that is usually linked with, okay, system that is easy to use, yes, no, quick results, and nothing to do with security, cryptography, etc. However, and again, we think that all elections matter, all meetings matter, and you can apply the same levels of cryptography, security, verifiability, even to live voting. The only thing is that you need to make sure that you have processes in place so this can be done within minutes or even seconds instead of hours. But you don't need to say, I don't need this because you can have both at the same time, and you can still run your, for example, I know in parliaments they vote real time with the real time voting, but they still want this verifiability and to make sure, because they are passing laws, they are talking about, it's not that if you're a parliament, you don't need this. Any matter, any meeting, any election, anything that needs voting for us matters. And the question is, why go with a black box system when you have the technology to go with a proper system that can be verified?
Thanks, Victor. And I think the last one here is rather dystopic question. If there's, I mean, there's this acknowledgement here of the democratic backslide, and is there any hope for democracy even if we succeed with online voting and new approaches to ensure voting integrity? Jonas, please make our day. Can you come up with any hopes here?
I'm always hopeful and optimistic, so I think that's basically kind of the way you have to deal with the world. There's a good quote from Václav Havel, and now I should actually look it up to make sure I get it right. But he says like that he has something really good about hope, where it's not just a strategy, but it's even though you don't necessarily know the result, you still keep believing in things. And I think that's also really with democracy and freedom why I personally do that, and why also when you come to the Copenhagen Democracy Summit, I think one of the things you see are all these democracy activist people that have come from Iran, from Venezuela, and have maybe been jailed as political prisoners, but still maintain a huge optimism about how freedom at some point can thrive in their countries. So in that sense, even though we have some overall numbers that are discerning, I think around the world, freedom is really still the fundamental force. And one of the best systems to accommodate freedom is a democratic system, and one that's of course helped by good technological solutions. So that's what I keep working for, even though there's a bit of countercurrent at the moment.
It's been for some years. Yes.
It has. No, but that makes that makes you at least see
But
that
you are not out of
that
job in many years to come, Jonas.
no, and I think you alluded earlier to the sort of the end of history period. I mean, we were probably at that time taking things for granted and saying, well, maybe individual agency doesn't matter. Now we really see it matters. It matters for good and bad. It also matters with the bad guys, the dictators around the world, that individual people like Putin with his war in Ukraine can do really bad things. In the same way, I still hope that good people in good systems can do good things.
So, do you think that was something I was wondering about? They're talking about this peace dividend that we harvested in peacetime in the Arctic and so and something. Could we actually speak about democratic dividend that we have sort of harvested for a while, and now we need to reinvest in our democracy, and that maybe goes for everyone, for all types of organizations that really want to thrive and live in a democratic society. How do you see that?
No, I like that comparison, Jacob. I think that might be very true as well, that we've been, and as part of that kind of progress history that was just linear of thinking, oh, everybody's going to live. Of course, I mean, people that are our age have experienced to see Eastern Europe move from communism to a Western liberal system, see the Baltic countries move out of the orbit of the Soviet Union and become independent countries. And I think we all thought, oh, this is just a given, and now we realize it's still something we might in Europe have to kind of fight for, and it's something that's so in that sense, I would say the war in Ukraine. Not that I see any positive things about war, but it has given us in the rest of Europe this awareness that democracy and freedom is not to be taken for granted, and it can actually be taken away from you, including from an autocratic neighbor, and of course also including by in internal erosion. So that being part of your system, being part of every generation, we have a Danish philosopher, Hal Koch, who has spoken about democracy as a form of life, and it's something that has to be renewed in every generation. So it's a continuous dialogue, and there's never any real endpoint, as we maybe thought before, where it's like, okay, now we can all just relax and go to the beach, and we don't have to care about politics or democracy any longer. That's just not the case, and we need to kind of renew it in each and every generation. And we need to renew it now with technology, which is also, as we talked about, both on the election integrity part, but also more broadly on the way we become a well-functioning digital democracy. I mean, what we see in the US, not that it's necessarily completely only linked to technology, is clearly that you've had much more polarization, and people end up in these small echo chambers where they just sit and listen to each other and are completely certain about that. And at least personally, I vouch very much for democracy, where you, of course, have differences, because that's why you use the system of voting for different opinions, but where you also have some basic understanding of that the others still want to live in the same society as you and be part of that.
I love to end this webinar with a Hal Koch quote. Each generation have to have a contract with democracy, and we will certainly do our part in terms of trying the best we can to ensure integrity and trust in the election process. So thank you very much, Jonas, for joining us today. That's been an absolute pleasure. Very knowledgeable and insightful comments, and great job you're doing in Alliance of Democracies. It's a great and important job. Victor, thank you so much for giving us a tour de force through the components and the processes in an end-to-end verifiable system. It was I learned actually quite a lot during this. So thank you very much for attending us. I will make
My
a small
pleasure.
advert again for an upcoming webinar where we really we deep dive into the crypto that we use in Electra and our systems, and how those layers of cryptography is doing all those solving all those paradoxes that could appear when you look at the different needs we have. So stay tuned on that one. Thank you so much. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and keep rising the bar for security and verifiability in all the elections that you are part of. Democracy is not something to toy with. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.